Oh, you want to know about the Galactic Military Academy's most infamous loyalty assessment? The one that made 3 separate species file formal complaints with the Intergalactic Ethics Committee. The incident that turned a routine training exercise into what historians now call the day the predator cubs collectively lost their minds? Well, buckle up, because this story involves everything you'd expect from putting apex predators, one human, and a bunch of overly dramatic military instructors in the same building during what was supposed to be a simple fire drill. Let me set the scene for you. Picture the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. All gleaming metal corridors, impossible architectural angles, and enough surveillance equipment to make a paranoid dictator weep with joy. The Galactic Military Academy prided itself on producing the finest officers from every species across known space. They had a 97% graduation rate, a zero-tolerance policy for weakness, and instructors who apparently thought psychological warfare was just another Tuesday activity. Now, in class designation Omega-7, you had what the Academy politely called an unusual cohort. Translation: they'd stuffed all the species that other people crossed the street to avoid into one group and hoped for the best. There was Thrak, a Kalari whose species had evolved from something that looked like a cross between a tiger and a particularly aggressive industrial shredder. His idea of playing nice involved only breaking 3 bones instead of 5. Then there was Zix, a Vorthak who stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs and had mandibles that could snap a steel beam in half. Her people had conquered 17 star systems before they got bored and decided diplomacy might be more entertaining. She spoke in what sounded like gravel being processed through a meat grinder, and her laugh could literally shatter glass. Rounding out this delightful trio of death machines was Keth, a Draknari whose species had perfected the art of being terrifying. They looked like someone had taken a wolf, scaled it up to human size, given it opposable thumbs, and then decided it needed more teeth. Keth could smell fear from 3 rooms away, and had reflexes fast enough to catch plasma bolts barehanded. And then there was Marcus Chen, human, age 22, from a little blue planet that most of the galaxy considered a backwater nature preserve. The Academy had accepted him as part of some cultural exchange program that probably sounded great in committee meetings and terrible in practice. Marcus was 5'9", weighed maybe 160 soaking wet, and had the kind of cheerful disposition that made seasoned warriors question their life choices. The instructors, naturally, took one look at this arrangement and decided it was either the greatest social experiment in galactic history or the setup for a really dark joke. Probably both. For 3 months, Omega-7 had been inseparable. While other cohorts formed the usual military bonds of mutual respect and shared suffering, these 4 had somehow developed what could only be described as a pack mentality. Marcus would share his human food with them. Apparently, chocolate was like crack to Kalari. And in return, his classmates would ensure that anyone who looked at him wrong would mysteriously develop sudden, severe cases of falling down stairs syndrome. The Academy brass watched this development with the kind of fascination usually reserved for studying particularly interesting bacteria cultures. Here was their pet human, somehow managing to not only survive but thrive among species that had been genetically engineered by evolution to be killing machines. It was unprecedented. It was remarkable. It was absolutely driving them insane. See, the Academy had a problem. Their precious predator species were supposed to be loyal to the galactic command structure, not to some random human who made funny jokes and brought them snacks. The instructors had spent generations perfecting training methods designed to break down individual attachments and rebuild them around military hierarchy. They'd written entire manuals on proper command loyalty protocols and emotional detachment for military efficiency. And then Marcus Chen showed up and accidentally turned their most dangerous students into what could only be described as an overprotective family unit. So, naturally, they decided to fix this with fire. Literally. The plan, as explained later during the disciplinary hearings, was elegantly simple in its stupidity. They would stage a realistic emergency scenario where the cohort would be forced to choose between following orders and protecting their human friend. The instructors would trigger the fire suppression systems, fill the training room with harmless but convincing smoke, and then order the predator species to evacuate while leaving Marcus behind. It was supposed to be a teachable moment about the importance of following commands over personal attachments, a valuable lesson in military discipline, a demonstration of how proper training could overcome primitive pack instincts. Instead, it became a masterclass in why you shouldn't mess with apex predators who've decided they like you. The exercise began on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Omega-7 was in Training Room 7. The Academy's sense of humor was about as sophisticated as their psychological evaluation methods, running through standard tactical scenarios. Marcus was doing his usual thing of being surprisingly competent while cracking jokes that made his teammates snort with what passed for laughter among their species. "You know," Marcus was saying as he efficiently dismantled a holographic enemy position, "back on Earth, we have this saying about not poking sleeping bears. I'm starting to think it applies to most things, really. Don't poke sleeping bears, don't poke active volcanoes, don't poke Vorthak mandibles." Zix's grinding laugh echoed through the room. Wise human philosophy, though sometimes poking is necessary for proper educational purposes. "Educational purposes," she says. Marcus grinned, ducking under Thrak's playful swipe. "That's what you called it when you educated those seniors who thought it was funny to put itching powder in my bedding." Keth's ears twitched with amusement. They learned much about Vorthak anatomy that day. Very educational. This was exactly the kind of casual, affectionate banter that made the instructors break out in stress hives. Here were 3 apex predators treating a human like a beloved pack member, and the human was responding with the kind of easy trust that suggested he had absolutely no idea how dangerous his friends were. Instructor Vex, a Zenthari whose species had evolved from something resembling a militaristic praying mantis, watched from the observation deck with growing irritation. The Zenthari prided themselves on emotional control and logical thinking, which made them excellent military instructors and terrible at understanding why anyone would risk their life for friendship. "Initiate Protocol Omega-77, Vex clicked to his assistant, a nervous Pluthan who had been hoping for a quiet day of routine training evaluations. "Sir, are you certain?" The psychological profiles suggest that this cohort has developed unusually strong bonding behaviors. The results might be... "The results will be educational," Vex interrupted, using the same tone that Zix had used earlier, though with considerably less warmth. "They need to learn that military discipline supersedes personal attachments. Begin the scenario. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 50 years, usually under the heading Case Studies in Catastrophic Planning Failures." The fire alarm began with its standard ear-piercing wail, followed immediately by the Academy's crisp, automated voice. "Emergency protocol activated. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Smoke began pouring from the ventilation systems, thick, gray, and convincing enough to trigger every survival instinct that 4 billion years of evolution had programmed into the room's occupants. The lights dimmed to emergency power, bathing everything in an ominous red glow that would have been perfect for a horror movie and was absolutely terrible for a routine training exercise. Marcus, being human, did exactly what humans do in emergency situations. He started organizing. "All right, everyone stay calm. Standard evacuation procedures. Thrak, your point since you've got the best low-light vision. Zix, rear guard because those mandibles can clear a path through anything. Keth, you're with me in the middle." It was textbook emergency response, executed with the kind of smooth efficiency that spoke to months of training together. They moved toward the exit as a unit, covering each other's blind spots and maintaining communication. It was exactly the kind of disciplined, professional response that the Academy had spent years trying to instill in its students, which is probably why Instructor Vex chose that moment to ruin everything. "Attention Omega-7. His voice crackled through the comm system with the kind of artificial authority that made everyone's teeth itch. New orders: Kalari, Vorthak, and Draknari personnel are to evacuate immediately. Human personnel will remain for additional assessment. The effect was immediate and absolute. 3 apex predators stopped moving as if someone had hit their off switches. The only sound in the smoke-filled room was the continued wailing of alarms and Marcus's confused, "Wait, what?" Thrak was the first to speak, and his voice carried undertones that would have made a smart person start running. "Instructor requests clarification." "Orders are clear," Vex replied, apparently missing the fact that Thrak had phrased that as a statement, not a question. "Predator species evacuate. Human remains." Zix's mandibles clicked in what anyone who knew Vorthak body language would recognize as extreme agitation. "Human comes with unit." "Negative. Human personnel has additional training requirements." Keth's response was a low growl that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up, despite the fact that he was supposedly the least threatening person in the room. Training requirements in smoke-filled room? Marcus, bless his human heart, tried to defuse the situation with logic. "Hey guys, it's okay. Maybe they've got some kind of species-specific evaluation thing. I'll catch up with you later." 3 pairs of predator eyes fixed on him with expressions that clearly communicated that no, it was absolutely not okay. And anyone who thought otherwise could come down to the training room and explain their reasoning in person. This was the moment when Instructor Vex made his second critical error in judgment. Instead of recognizing that his carefully planned lesson was rapidly spiraling into a disaster that would require significant paperwork, he decided to double down. "Final warning: predator species will evacuate immediately or face disciplinary action." The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that makes meteorologists start tracking storm patterns. Thrak, Zix, and Keth exchanged looks that contained about 3 generations' worth of nonverbal communication. Marcus, despite being human, and therefore allegedly terrible at reading alien body language, got the distinct impression that his friends had just held an entire conversation without saying a word. And apparently, they'd reached a unanimous decision. "Negative," Thrak said, crossing his arms and settling into a stance that suggested he was prepared to wait until the heat death of the universe. "Human is Pack. Pack stays together." Zix moved to flank the door, her 8-foot frame blocking most of the exit. "Instructor may file complaints with appropriate authorities." Keth completed the triangle, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the ventilation shafts. "Disciplinary action acceptable. Human safety not negotiable." Up in the observation deck, Instructor Vex was experiencing what psychologists would later describe as a profound cognitive disconnect. His carefully planned exercise in military discipline had just been derailed by 3 students who were following military principles: unit cohesion, protecting team members, refusing to abandon personnel under fire, while simultaneously ignoring his direct orders. It was, from an academic standpoint, absolutely fascinating. From a practical standpoint, it was a complete disaster. "Sir," his assistant whispered, "perhaps we should end the exercise." Vex's mandibles clicked with irritation. They need to learn proper chain of command, increase smoke density. This was his third and final critical error. The moment the smoke thickened, 3 sets of predator instincts that had been held in check by civilization and military training suddenly snapped to full alert. The Academy's harmless smoke might not have been toxic, but it was definitely triggering every danger-to-pack member response that millions of years of evolution had hardwired into their brains. Marcus started coughing, which was a perfectly normal human response to breathing smoke. His 3 friends heard this and interpreted it through the filter of their respective species' protective instincts. What happened next occurred so fast that the Academy's security cameras could barely track it. Thrak went from standing guard to active threat elimination mode in approximately 0.3 seconds. He crossed the room to Marcus in a single bound, scooped him up like a particularly fragile piece of luggage, and tucked him against his chest where the human would be protected from smoke inhalation. Zix, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the ventilation system was the primary threat. Her mandibles extended to their full combat length, and she began systematically destroying every smoke outlet she could reach. The sound was like a construction demolition project being conducted by someone in a particularly bad mood. Keth took a different approach. He sniffed the air, traced the source of the smoke to its origin point, and then began making a sound that could only be described as a war howl. It was the kind of noise that bypassed the brain entirely and spoke directly to the part of the nervous system responsible for run away very fast. Marcus, pressed against Thrak's chest and being carried like a baby, tried to process what was happening. "Guys, I think this might be an overreaction." "Human is coughing," Thrak rumbled, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested imminent violence against anyone who might be causing said coughing. "Smoke is threat. Remove threat. I'm okay, really. It's just a little smoke." Zix paused in her systematic destruction of the ventilation system, long enough to look at him with an expression of profound disbelief. Human defines okay as slowly suffocating in potentially toxic environment. Well, when you put it like that. Keth's howl reached a crescendo that actually triggered the Academy's seismic sensors. Somewhere in the building, other students were probably wondering if they were under attack by a small army of very angry space wolves. Up in the observation deck, Instructor Vex was frantically trying to abort the exercise while his assistant had given up all pretense of military bearing and was making what sounded like prayers in 3 different languages. "Shut it down," Vex ordered. "Shut everything down, now." "The smoke system isn't responding, sir." "I think the Vorthak damaged something important." "What about the door locks?" "Also not responding." "The Draknari's howling seems to have interfered with the electronic systems." Vex stared through the reinforced observation window at the scene below, where his carefully planned lesson in military discipline had transformed into what looked like a nature documentary about overprotective wildlife. 3 apex predators had essentially declared war on his training room, and they were winning. "Sir," his assistant said in the tone of someone who really didn't want to be the bearer of more bad news, "the Kalari is approaching the door." Indeed, Thrak had carried Marcus over to the exit and was examining the electronic lock with the kind of professional interest that maintenance technicians develop when they're about to bypass someone else's security system. Except Thrak wasn't a maintenance technician. He was a Kalari who had apparently decided that doors were just another obstacle between him and Marcus's safety. "That door is rated for combat scenarios," Vex muttered. "Reinforced durasteel. Military-grade electronics." Thrak placed one clawed hand against the lock mechanism and squeezed. The sound of crumpling metal echoed through the training room. "Was rated," the assistant corrected quietly. The door, which had been designed to withstand plasma weapons and small explosives, opened with the kind of protesting shriek that suggested its warranty had just been voided in a very permanent way. Thrak stepped through, still carrying Marcus, followed by Zix and Keth, who were maintaining defensive positions as if they expected enemy fire from the corridor. They made it approximately 20 feet before running into the Academy's emergency response team, which consisted of 6 senior instructors and a medical officer who had been expecting to find students in need of evacuation assistance. Instead, they found 3 apex predators in full protective mode surrounding a human who was trying very hard to explain that this was all a big misunderstanding. "Medical assistance required?" asked the medic, a sensible healer-class Alteran who had seen enough Academy training incidents to know when to keep her questions simple. "Human experienced smoke inhalation," Thrak reported, gently setting Marcus down but maintaining a position where he could immediately pick him up again if necessary. "Require clean air environment and threat assessment of training facility." Marcus waved his hands frantically. "I'm fine, really. Just a little coughing. Nothing serious." The medic ran her scanner over him with professional efficiency. "Mild irritation to respiratory system, no permanent damage. Recommend rest and hydration." Zix's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. "Acceptable prognosis. Human will recover." Keth's ears were still flat against his head, and his nose was twitching as he continued to track scent trails. Source of smoke threat requires elimination. One of the senior instructors, a Draknari himself, stepped forward with the kind of careful body language that suggested he understood exactly how volatile the situation had become. Students, the exercise has been concluded. There is no further threat. Exercise? Thrak's voice carried the kind of dangerous quiet that made smart people start planning escape routes. Training scenario, the instructor clarified, apparently missing the fact that this was not helping his case. Designed to test loyalty protocols. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus, who had been feeling guilty about causing such a fuss, suddenly felt a different emotion entirely. You mean this was intentional? His voice was very calm, which anyone who knew humans would recognize as a warning sign roughly equivalent to Keth's war howl. Educational assessment of unit cohesion and command structure adherence, another instructor added helpfully. Marcus looked at his three friends, who were watching him with the kind of intense focus that suggested they were waiting for some kind of signal. He looked at the instructors, who were beginning to realize that their carefully planned lesson might have had some unintended consequences. Then he started laughing. It wasn't the kind of laughter that suggested amusement. It was the kind of laughter that made everyone in the corridor take an involuntary step backward, because humans who laugh like that are usually about to do something that results in very large amounts of paperwork. You staged a fire, Marcus said through his laughter, filled a room with smoke, triggered every survival instinct these three have, put me in what they perceived as mortal danger, and then acted surprised when they chose friendship over following orders from people who were trying to hurt me. The exercise parameters were clearly defined. The exercise parameters, Marcus interrupted, his laughter cutting off abruptly, were stupid. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to stand here and let you punish my friends for protecting me from your stupidity, you're about to learn some very interesting things about human pack behavior. The silence that followed was broken by what sounded suspiciously like approving rumbles from 3 apex predators. The senior Draknari instructor's ears twitched with what might have been respect. And what does human pack behavior entail exactly? Marcus's smile was bright and cheerful and absolutely terrifying. Well, first, I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Intergalactic Ethics Committee about the use of psychological manipulation in educational settings. Then I'm going to contact the Academy Review Board about instructors who create dangerous situations for entertainment purposes. After that, I'll probably write a detailed report about this incident and submit it to every major news network in the galaxy, because I think people would be very interested to know about the Academy's creative training methods. He paused, his smile becoming even more cheerful. And then, if anyone tries to discipline my friends for refusing to abandon me in what they reasonably perceived as a life-threatening situation, I'm going to demonstrate why humans are the only species that figured out how to make lawyers into a weapon of mass destruction. Thrak made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Human pack behavior is efficient. Zix's mandibles clicked approvingly. Very educational. Keth's tail was wagging for the first time since the exercise began. Like human philosophy about not poking sleeping bears. Marcus nodded solemnly. Exactly like that, except in this case, you didn't just poke the bear. You poked the bear's friends. And then acted surprised when they decided to poke back. The aftermath of what became known as the loyalty exercise incident was swift and comprehensive. Instructor Vex was reassigned to a desk job reviewing supply requisitions, which was probably safer for everyone involved. The Academy's Ethics Committee implemented new guidelines about the use of perceived danger in training scenarios. The Intergalactic Ethics Committee sent a strongly worded letter that used terms like psychological manipulation and species-specific trauma responses in ways that made lawyers everywhere nod approvingly. Most importantly, Omega-7 remained intact as a unit. The Academy brass, faced with the choice between admitting their methods were flawed or doubling down on stupid, chose the path of administrative wisdom. They declared the exercise a valuable learning experience and quietly revised their training protocols to avoid any future incidents involving apex predators, humans, and artificial emergencies. Marcus never had to use his threatened legal weapons, though he did keep the paperwork filed and ready, just in case. His three friends appreciated this level of preparedness, which they recognized as a form of pack maintenance behavior. And if other instructors occasionally found themselves on the receiving end of particularly intense stares from certain predator species whenever they suggested training exercises involving Marcus, well, that was probably just a coincidence. After all, apex predators are very good at learning from experience. And the lesson they learned was simple. Anyone who threatened their human would discover that loyalty works both ways, and that some bonds are stronger than any military regulation. The Academy never tried another loyalty test with Omega-7. Some sleeping bears, they learned, are better left alone, especially when they have friends.